Welcome to another night, Smoke and Mirrors Radio Hour with Jay Weidner. Here every Monday through Friday night, 6 to 7 in the Pacific, 9 to 10 on the East Coast, all over the world on the Internet. We're on the Global Star Radio satellite, and we're having a lot of fun. And let's see, last night we had James Howard Kunstler on, talking about the long emergency. That was a really good show, I think, and that'll be up in our archives, which will be at the School of Sacred Mysteries. All the archives will go there. I also want you to know that we have a new website called smokeandmirrorsradio.net, which will have our schedule, and you can listen to the show through there. You can also listen to the show through sacredmysteries.com. And got a lot of really important things that are coming up and a lot of important things going on. This is truly the turn of the ages as we get closer and closer to not 2012 really, but just the what I was talking about last night, which is called the fourth turning, which is a generational shift in happens every 85 years in the United States. The first one was the Revolution, and then 85 years later was the Civil War. 85 years after that was the Great Depression, and it's 85 years later right now. And we'll be going through this through about 2020 or 2025. We're going to come out of the other end, and it's going to be as radical a shift as it was going from the agrarian United States to the post-war United States in 1945. Anyway, tonight we have a great guest, one of my favorite people. He goes by the moniker of Mann, A.T. Mann. His nickname is Tad, and we call him, it's his middle name. He's a really cosmic guy. He's written a great book called The Divine Plot. He's got a website at atman.net, and that's atmann.net. We can see all his books. He's got a lot of books coming out here. I'm really blown away by how incredibly productive you've been there, Tad. I don't even know where to begin here. I was going to start saying, some of your old stuff, but you've got so many new things coming out. You must be busy as hell.
I am actually extremely busy at the moment. It's true.
So you have Sacred Landscapes, The Threshold Between Worlds, which is coming out in a year, which looks really good. You also are the author of, Sacred Architecture, I believe it was called.
Yes,
and
yes.
Great book about architecture from all over the world. And were you an architecture, have a major in architecture or something?
I was an architect.
You were an architect.
I graduated from Cornell University in the 60s.
Wow.
And
really?
It was my childhood ambition to be an architect. And it was a very interesting journey because I always felt, even as a child, although I didn't know any architects, that there was a kind of mystery involved. But of course, going off to an Ivy League university that was one of the best architecture schools in America, I kept looking for the mystery and didn't quite find it. and so I was very, very successful as an architect. I mean, I had a very unusual circumstance because my father was killed during the Second World War. He was a bomber pilot. So during the 60s, instead of having to go to Vietnam or the Peace Corps, I was able to go to New York City and work as an architect. And so, in my very early 20s, I was designing $60 million buildings.
Wow.
And it was actually very, very interesting because I began realizing increasingly that what interested me much more than buildings as objects in space was time.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you walk through a building, and when you walk through powerful spaces in particular, you get this sense of being in time. And, a lot of profound architects are very, very interested in proportion systems. And I began realizing, even at that time back in my 20s, in the late 60s, that there were certain rules, mathematical rules, that governed the way time works. And that became something which really fascinated me.
Well, that's one of my very, very favorite subjects, actually.
I realized that.
Yeah, and I've written 2 books about alchemy that has been engraved into the Gothic cathedrals, and I've been ever since I first realized about the architecture of the Gothic cathedrals, I have become completely obsessed with architecture, especially sacred proportion in architecture. And I agree with you. It is like time. And when you walk down the center aisle of Notre Dame and realize that, King Louis the 14th was coronated there, and Napoleon, was made the emperor there, and the amazing things that have gone on in one place, which itself was built on a temple dedicated to Isis there in the center.
Virtually all of those sacred spaces were, and it's again, it was interesting because, of course, at Cornell, which is a really great school in many, many ways, just in the art history and architectural history courses we took, I began to realize, and I don't know whether any other of my classmates actually did it the same way, but, it's fascinating upon realizing it, almost all of the major Christian monuments or Jewish monuments or Islamic monuments, in fact, were all built on the foundations of very early temples, and often temples to the goddess.
Yeah, because there's something it's something about the place. There's a certain power within the place, and it just keeps attracting that kind of thing over the centuries, like the Kaaba in Mecca. I mean, it's been built 9 times or something now, and people have been going to that exact spot for a long, long time.
It's interesting you say that, because my Sacred Landscape book, which is now
great book,
being finally edited, and it'll be published in about a year. But the Sacred Landscape book, I decided really that there are certain spaces, certain places around the planet that are very, very powerful. I've been to many of them, and I know you have also, Jay, but it's interesting because I began looking at it from a slightly different point of view, which is, why is it that such spaces, or what is it that such spaces evoke in us that it brings us to acknowledge the sacred? And I realized that that's actually a very, very important, maybe the most important factor.
I agree.
And that there are mythological histories of such places, and there are certain almost archetypal characteristics that describe them. And I tried to identify some of those in the book, and it was a very, very fascinating study. Things like the sacred mountain. Mountains all over the world have always signified ascent to heaven. And just because early people saw them as being a place where, one went to go meet the gods, but also, of course, the gods came down to earth. And, of course, we live in a time that maybe you could say, like John Lennon, that it's quite godless, but I don't actually think so. I think we're being forced by circumstances to get back into touch with these primary energies. And it's interesting because, one of the cardinal ideas of sacred landscapes is that when organized religion like the Roman Catholic Church began identifying the precinct around a church as being sacred, what it meant really, which is quite profound, is that when you say that a certain area is sacred, it means everything around it isn't. And of course, one of the critical principles is that our whole world is sacred. And I think we're beginning belatedly to realize this, but I think that that's such an important issue that it's really one of the cornerstones of the book.